So without further ado, I would like to welcome our guest, Len Jordan. Come on in. Come on in, Len.
I got to see Bono in Paris in September, and it was not that good. He did not get that much applause.
No, it wasn't
Very nice of you guys.
It wasn't as popular.
He wasn't there to see me, by the way. So.
Yeah, it wasn't as popular as Len Jordan. Well, thanks, Len, for coming. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Great to be here.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of time from your family and the tennis match you might be playing, right? Poorly. Well, again, for people who have not been here before, this is truly just a conversation between two human beings, obviously talking a lot about startups. If you have a question, try to save it to the end, but if it's a burning question you need to ask it, feel free to interrupt. It's not going to bother us one bit. So, the last 15, 20 minutes we'll go for Q&A, but like I said, if you have a burning question, just blurt it out. We'll happily answer it. And, feel free to get up, get your water, drinks, whatever. We don't want anything left when we leave here, right? So drink up and have a good time. So again, thanks for being here. We've known each other for a few years, but tell the story of why you're a VC. Like you've been 18 years now, 19 years?
Yeah, I started in depending on how you count, 2003, 16 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us why you went from Real Networks to Fraser, and then. So what was the transition to be a VC, and why do you get up in the morning and say, I love to be a VC?
Well, my backstory is I was supposed to be an attorney. Are there any attorneys in the room? Okay, no attorney jokes today. Well, Buzz is an attorney, then lots of attorney jokes.
Non-practicing.
Like a lot of people, I sort of stumbled into tech. When I was 21, I'd gotten done with college and was sure I was going to be an attorney. Had applied to law school, was accepted, but a buddy of mine was working at a software company. This was a long time ago, and I walked into the software company and decided, you know what, I think I'll put off law school for a year, and I put it off every year for 32 years. And I just loved the software business. It felt like magic. When I got involved in the software world, it was 1987, which I know seems like a long time ago because it is. And software was like magic. It just felt amazing to me that people could invent new products and deliver them 9 months, 12 months, 18 months later, and do things that seemed not possible before that. So I spent 14 years in the software world. I've never had the courage to do what any of you have done to start a company, but I did restart my second company, funded it on my own credit cards, almost crashed it into the ground, barely raised an angel round, ended up raising a venture round, ended up growing the company and selling it. So before Real Networks, I had two companies before that, both that were acquired, and then joined Real Networks a long time ago, helped take that public, ran that half the company, was at Fraser, was involved in some companies like DocuSign, Series A, and Control4, and some other companies you may know about, and then I've been here for about 10 years. And I guess to answer the question, I just love startups. We focus at Madrona on early stage companies. I love getting involved as early as possible in helping companies think about their product, think about their market, think about how they're going to build their team. And it's fun because when you're in venture, you get to do it with a bunch of different companies, not just one.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like you're just working on one little bucket every day. And in your process, of being a funder of companies, what is the thing that you enjoy? Because you're evaluating teams probably on a somewhat constant basis. What's the things that you enjoy, like Len really enjoys about his daily work?
Yeah, I think, there's two parts to what we do. There's finding the next big idea and funding it, and then there's trying to help those companies after we fund it to be successful. I would say both are sort of equally fun. The first one is super ambiguous, right? When you're an early stage investor, you're trying to decide, is this going to be a big market? Is it going to be a really breakthrough product or service? And is it a team that we think can build that and deliver it and market it and sell it? And we rely on a lot of really imperfect information, right? Because you're not getting to evaluate financials and business models so much as you're trying to figure out those things I talked about, market, product, and team. So it's fun but ambiguous. I think the fun part about helping companies after we've invested is, we try and help with three main things: talent, helping you recruit people, just advice, company building advice. We've seen a lot, we've made plenty of mistakes, we're gonna make more. But our ability to help maybe navigate or help you navigate strategic challenges or team challenges or company building challenges is the second thing. And then figuring out how to get to the promised land. We've had 4 IPOs, I think, at Madrona, meaning 4 companies we've invested in have gone public in the last 2 or 3 years. The average length of time from the time we invested until they went public was 13 years. The shortest was 11, and the longest was 17. So this is a long-term business. None of our successes were overnight successes. None of them happened quickly, and all of them had big rocky roads until they got to the promised land. So people don't always know that. They think it just ended well, but trust me, plenty of them don't end well, and even the ones that do end well, had moments of truth along the way that were hard.
Yeah, it's not, no matter how smart or how good the team is, there's still speed bumps along the way. Where is the, like for Len, again, for you personally, what is the piece that is really the stuff that you're good at? Like, what's Len really good at? Like you have a skill set.
I just really don't know.
I'm still looking for that thing. What is that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, right? I mean, look, we all try and get better every day. Because I have a lot of operating background, I was at a company that went from 10 million to 90 million in revenue. I was at one that went from 0 to 20. I was at one that went from 15 to 240 million in revenue. I've been on the boards of lots of companies. I've been involved in some boards of companies that didn't do well, where we didn't, the company didn't grow quickly. Every one of my companies could have done better. That I can assure you, right? They all had steps along the way where they could have done things differently. So I really get energy from working with entrepreneurs and trying to help them think about what the next chess move should be, what the move after that might be. And what I've learned about myself is I'm not sure I'm very creative, but I think I'm good at helping people choose ideas. In other words, if someone's at a crossroads and they're thinking about, should I do this or that, I think at a product or a market or a team level, I'm pretty good at helping them lay out what the choices might be, what the pros and cons of the choices might be, and then how to make a decision. But I've learned to not assume that I am great at actually coming up with brand new product and market ideas. I think there are people that are awesome at doing that, probably many of you are, and I think it's good to know your limitations.
Sure.
And I think sometimes, and not to be critical of my friends that are venture capitalists, but I know some venture capitalists that aren't as creative as they think they are. And it's being self-aware is good, right? Knowing what you're not good at is good. It's just a good life skill, and knowing what you are good at is good too.
Yeah, exactly. Like knowing you're bad at one thing is, that's good to know. Like if you have a bad backhand, you shouldn't go there, right?
Right. I have a good backhand and a bad forehand, so I go over to this side of the court and I hope it comes over here.
And so in your process, of evaluating, right? Like I come to you with a business and have a interesting team, et cetera, et cetera. What are things that, like, again, you look at? I mean, Madrona looks at things as a group. I mean, there's several people. It's not like you're making the only decision whether it's funded or not funded. But for you, what is the kind of things that you care about and what you focus on, and what are those things that, like, what are 1 or 2 things you like? These things are just critical. Like there is no. I'm not debating this one. This has to be X.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll point out, I'll use a company as an example. So
Okay.
we seed funded a company here in town called Wrench. Has anybody heard of Wrench?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so Wrench is on-prem car repair. And the idea behind Wrench is that taking your car to a repair shop for a lot of people isn't a very fun experience. And I'm not condemning all repair shops. I'm just saying it's a hassle to go there. You have to get transportation, then they look at your car, then you have to come back, and then they have to order parts, and then you might have to come back again. It turns out that a lot of things that you can do to your car when it needs repair can be done when it's parked in front of your office or in front of your school or in your driveway at your house. And so the founder, Ed, who really knew nothing about cars except how to drive one, had an experience where he realized, gee, this just doesn't work very well. What if I could hire mechanics that would come to you and fix your car where it is? They can't fix everything, but you'd be surprised. Brake jobs, alternators, lube oil filter, windshield, like probably 90% of the things that you typically have done to your car, aside from like getting in an accident or something, they can do in front of your house. So what we liked about the idea was that it really is a big market idea. The car repair business is a $47 billion a year business in the US. So we had to believe that if you delivered that service differently and better, that people would buy it.
Yeah.
But if you believe that, it's plenty big, right? And you'll hear a lot of venture firms say, well, we're looking for a big market idea or a big opportunity or a big TAM. And what we've learned is that some ideas just aren't that big, and it doesn't mean they're not a great business, but they may not be a venture scale business. And what we mean by venture scale, and I think this is worth explaining because people often wonder, well, why isn't my idea big enough to be venture scale? Well, it might be useful to take 1 minute and explain like how we make money, what we're supposed to do to be successful as a venture firm. So last year we raised a $300 million fund, and our goal is to see if we can triple that fund. So turn 300 million into 900 million. And let's say that that when we invest in a company, we own 20% of that company, and let's say by the time we exit, either take it public or sell it, we own 10%. I'm using 10% because that's easy math for me to do. Well, if we're going to take 300 million and turn it into 900 million, we own 10% of companies, it means the collective value of all the companies has to be $9 billion, right? That's what 10% of 9 billion is.
Yep.
So now we're going to have plenty of companies that wipe out. A classic venture model says that for every 3 companies we invest in, 1 will lose everything, 1 will kind of get our money back, and 1 will get 5 times our money back. But the reason venture firms are focused on really big ideas is we need to have some big ideas that really, really work in order to drive those kinds of returns. And the reason we're trying to drive those returns is if it takes us 15 years to return 3 times our money, if you do the math backwards and you look at things like internal rate of return, that'll generate a rate of return for our investors, the LPs that invest in our funds, of about 20 to 22%.
Yeah.
And that's a great return. You might ask, well, why doesn't everybody put all their money in venture? Because it's super risky, right? If you hit the wrong vintage or the wrong fund, you could lose a lot more than 20%.
And Len, the life of the fund is, make sure that you're clear on that. Like
usually the life of the fund nominally is about 12 years, but most funds in the last 10 years have had to get extensions, so they last longer than that. We're still active in our 3rd fund, which is a fund that we closed in 2004, so that fund is 15 years old, and we're still not done. We still have some very high quality companies in that fund. The reason I give you all that background is our investors, endowments, foundations, et cetera, they are patient. They're willing to wait 15 years for us to generate returns, but they want big returns. They're also willing to tolerate a lot of risk. But you can do the math. If we fund your company and your company sells for $50 million and we put $5 million into it and we own 20% of it, that's not a bad outcome. We put in 5, we get back 10. But relative to the goal of returning 900 million, it doesn't help us that much. And I'm not saying that's a bad outcome. I'm just saying it's not what we aspire to. So our hope, to answer your question, is that when we fund a company, the company has the potential for that level of return. It doesn't mean they're going to get there. In fact, in most cases, they're not.
Sure.
But if we look at it, I looked at an idea today, and I just in my heart of hearts, I just don't think the idea is ever going to be that big. And it doesn't mean that isn't a good company with a good idea that deserves a different type of financing, but I don't know that it's a good venture backlook. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it's important that everyone understands that, 2% of companies are backed by VCs, like 2%. Not the other way around, it's 2%.
And plenty of good ones are not backed by venture capitalists.
So not every company is a good match for VC money, because VC money brings different things. You got to deal with a guy like this, and
how fun could that be?
And how come that got to be? And there's different expectations for venture funded versus different types of funding, or of course bootstrapping. So it's just important to understand that not everybody's a perfect fit for VC, and I think that's the key here. And understanding why, which is what you explained, I think is the critical piece.
Yeah, so big market, and I took a long time to explain that, but I thought it might be helpful for people to just kind of know how a venture firm works, mathematically. Big breakthrough product and a team that we think can execute. And the one thing I will say about team is if you look at the most successful teams we've backed, almost never has the founder been an executive at another successful tech company. More often than not, if it's a tech company, and most of our investments are in tech-oriented companies, it's someone that was a pretty, I hate to use the word low level, but it usually was a fairly low-level person inside a company with a really big idea. I mean, we backed Sujal Patel long before I was involved in Madrona, although Sujal worked in my group at Real Network. So Sujal started a company here in town that people might have heard of called Isilon in the storage space. And they really reinvented computer storage. And Sujal was, I don't know, 3 levels below me at Real Networks, 4 levels below me. I was running half the company, and he worked for, a guy who worked for a guy who worked for a guy who worked for me. But you know what? People knew Sujal was brilliant. And I was not in any way surprised when I learned that he had left to go start a company. Did he look on paper like an executive that knew how to run a company? No. But he was super smart, very technical, had really good domain expertise, had all the right instincts to be a great CEO in terms of leadership and management and building teams and things like that, but was totally, truly unproven at it. But Madrona took the bet on Sujal, and it worked out, and that company, was a huge win for us in our second fund. And my point is, that's more, Sujal's profile is more typical than, the former executive at a big company starts frankly, that almost never happens. Those folks have made too much money and are too successful to want to go start a
Well,
company.
they're not hungry, right? They're not.
Well, I'm sure there are some, but anyway, I think it's important for people to know that we're not looking for the former executive that's starting a company. If you are a former executive and you want to go start a company, we'd be thrilled to talk to you. But I'm just saying that's not usually the profile of the person.
Yeah, like Aaron from Visible, right? He was just a guy at Microsoft. He was just a guy in the ad
Yeah,
group.
Aaron's another good example of a classic profile.
Yeah.
A super smart technical person with good instincts that recognized a big problem and said, hey, I think I can fix that and make that better.
Exactly. And again, in your day job, where are the things that you like to see in a founder, like, and I'm talking about like early stages. I'm not talking like, hey Lynn, nice to meet you. Can you write me a check? Not that guy, but I'm talking about like, what are you looking for in the individual? Again, like the Aarons of the world. You don't know they're going to be good. You meet them, but you're like in your head like, that guy's got something. Like, what is that thing to you? Like, why? Like, and how do you cultivate that relationship? I mean, here's what I think what people understand is you have to cultivate relationships just like they have to cultivate relationships with you because you want to talk to the best people. And so you have to evaluate, is Mike any good? Do I want to keep a relationship with him? I mean, you do that. It's not like, it's not maybe that black and white, but how do you do that in your job? I mean, because it's part of you have to do is evaluate talent.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we probably meet with 800 to 900 companies a year, and we fund about 10. And so we meet with a lot of entrepreneurs. And I think the basic attributes that we look for are kind of what you'd expect. Thinking of one that I met yesterday where they had a really great understanding of a big market idea, a big opportunity to disrupt a market with a problem that they articulated really well. They had a really clear idea of what their product or solution might be. Their understanding of the market, competition, other solutions, other approaches was incredible. The number of customers they'd had really hard conversations with around this idea to really smoke test it and see if it made sense. They'd done a lot of that work. They didn't just sort of jump at the first idea. They really were curious. That's probably the top attribute I would look for in an entrepreneur is curiosity. They were really curious about finding out how many things could go wrong with my idea. And the way they were exploring that was by talking to lots of prospect customers. And the third thing so just sort of, being smart, being curious, those two things aren't always the same thing. I know plenty of people who are smart and not curious. They're sure they've already figured stuff out when in fact they haven't, and that's dangerous. Super dangerous when it's someone that's really smart because they're able to persuade other people that are less smart that they have already figured out things out. And
Sure.
that's the worst combination. And then the third attribute is I would just say humility and transparency. I backed a company, Control4, which in the home control and automation space in 2005 or 4, and they went public after a long journey. And I remember in the first meeting I had with the entrepreneur, he had all of these different elements of the business that I really didn't like. They were getting into hardware, and they had a weird channel strategy and too many products and a poor gross margin. I remember 7 things I didn't like about the business. But Will, and he was actually aptly named by his parents, because Will was the most willful person I've ever met. But he would, in a lot of instances, instead of sort of changing his answer to appease me when I pressed him hard on things, I remember many times him just saying, well, he'd answer my question, he'd listen to it, then he'd answer it, and then he'd explain, well, this is why we're approaching it this way. Maybe there's a different approach, but I think you're just gonna have to get comfortable that that's just a risk of this business, and if you don't like the hardware business, you shouldn't invest in us. And I remember thinking, well, that takes courage, but like, there are some things about his business model he could alter or change, and there are some things he couldn't. And instead of trying to change my mind, he was pretty comfortable just saying, like, that's what we are, that's what we're selling. I'm gonna do my best to explain to you why we're doing it that way. If you're not okay with it, maybe we're not for you. And he wasn't cocky about it, he just was being straight with me. And I remember thinking, I can really trust this person, because if we don't feel like we can trust the entrepreneur, not to just be honest with us, that's like the lowest level of trust, right? If I ask you a question and you don't lie to me, that's not the standard for the business, right? The standard is
You are now at the.
right. That's a court of law standard where you don't get put in jail for perjury. But we're looking for a different standard than that. So we're looking for how open will you be before we even ask the question about things that you haven't figured out. There was an entrepreneur that I met with last Thursday. She was awesome, and one of the things I loved about my meeting with her is when she hadn't figured things out yet, she would just say, "That's just something we haven't really figured out yet." No explanation, no concocted answer in the meeting. And sometimes she'd said, "Well, we think we might go about it this way," but there were some good questions where I felt like, she could have started to contrive something. She just said, yeah, we don't know on that. That's a good question. And she also didn't say, well, we'll figure it out by next meeting, because some things she just said, I don't think we're going to be able to figure that out for a while.
Yeah, it's
And I felt like, well, I can trust this person. She's decided the top 4 things she needs to figure out are these. These ones can be put off. I can trust her, but I'm never going to be worrying that there's some answer that's being constructed on the side.
Yeah, so that transparency is, it's critical, because you obviously don't know what's happening internally. Contrary to some popular belief, the VCs have no idea what's going on internally. They're not that close to the situation. So, it's your job as a CEO to ask for help, because that's again what your job is to help me be successful. We both have like goals in that aspect. Where is where's the secret sauce for a VC? Like, what's the secret sauce? Why are some VCs more successful than others? What do you think the secret sauce is? And I'm not saying Madrona's, I'm just saying in general.
I think we have to be curious. I mean, the first thing I would say is I think we have to be really curious as well. My partner, Tom Alberg, who's one of the co-founders of Madrona, is a mentor to me and someone I have a lot of respect for. I feel like Tom is one of the most curious people I've ever met. He sees things before other people see things. And I hope when I'm of Tom's vintage that I can continue to not dismiss ideas out of hand because they seem too breakthrough. How many people dismissed Facebook? There are a lot of venture capital firms in Silicon Valley who did not fund Facebook because they thought social networks have already been tried, they don't work, and Facebook was different. I'm not necessarily the world's biggest Facebook fan, I'm just saying it turned out to be a pretty good idea. In terms of building a massive new way that people could communicate and connect with each other. But a lot of firms dismissed it because they'd sort of written off that category. The same was true of search. No one here remembers Alta Vista or Lycos or Yahoo or others, but I do. But Google went to raise money, and some people thought, well, search is over, it's been won. because they're already.
Yahoo's there, Yahoo's got it done.
Yeah, and those people were wrong. Google's one of the 5 most valuable companies on the planet now. So one thing I think separates venture for the really good folks from less good ones, and I press myself on this every day, is to not dismiss new ideas because you think they've been tried before and they didn't work. Because the world changes all the time.
Timing.
The ecosystem changes, and people's appetite, consumer behaviors, technologies. I mean, a lot of people, I was at a company that pioneered streaming audio and video. That company isn't as successful as it certainly could have been, but we were on the right track. I mean, the notion that eventually you'd be able to stream audio and video and not, and that cable would be disrupted. Now, were we the big winner in the space? No, but we were approximately right that something like Spotify would exist, and that something like
Absolutely.
YouTube would exist, and that something like Netflix would exist. And so I've just learned that, whether it's AR, VR, or autonomous vehicles, or robotics for drones, or some of the bigger new ideas, or things around blockchain, there are some ideas that people immediately dismiss, and I think the best VC firms don't let too much institutional knowledge shape that. I think the same is true of people. I think we have to be careful not to stereotype what a great entrepreneur looks like, because it changes all the time,
Absolutely.
right? I mean, there is no model for what someone should look like in terms of their background or experience to start a company. There really isn't.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely 100% agree. Where is where's the landmines, right? Where are the landmines for people? And I think let's talk about the people who are not going to be funded from a VC because it's just not a right fit, it's not scalable, and there's several factors there. But what are some of those landmines that may cloud the decision process for that entrepreneur to think, I am a VC company? Like, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Like, where are the landmines there that makes them say, oh, totally, I'm totally a VC, I'm in that, I should be a VC company. When at the end of the day, you look at that and it's like, there's no way in God's green earth that's a VC company.
Well, we did talk about one, which is it a really big idea?
Sure.
And I mean, the car maintenance and repair business is an easy one because there's an existing business out there that you can measure and say, hey, if just part of that business ships over here, it's big. The same was true with Netflix, right? You could say, hey, how much cable television is being consumed and how many blockbuster videos are being rented. You could have looked at that and said, hey, Reed Hastings' idea may not work, but if it does work, you didn't have to do a lot of math to figure out that that's a big business.
Yeah.
There are other new businesses like Facebook where there was no thing that Facebook replaced really. I mean, did it replace phone calls and meetings at coffee shop? I mean, it was just a new thing. So I think those businesses are more conceptual. But I think some entrepreneurs aren't as clear-headed as they might be around, is this a really big idea and how would I measure it and size it? I think protectability, I mean, most venture firms want to protect or want to fund companies that are protectable at a technology level because the model works really well. If you fund some software company that builds a really deep technology like what Isilon built, the ability to copy what Isilon built would have been really challenging. Not impossible, but pretty challenging. So when we made that investment, we were clearly betting that Sujal and his team knew enough at a pretty deep level technically about how to build that kind of storage system that even if someone else could want to copy the idea, that it would be really hard for them to do it. And those are easy because we sort of write a check, fund the R&D team. We are betting that R&D team can build it once, and then we'll put more capital in and get others to put more capital in, and they'll just spend money selling that piece of software over and over and over again with no incremental fixed cost and really no incremental variable cost because there's no COGS.
Sure.
And so we tend to like tech businesses for that reason because they get a lot of leverage from them. Why aren't we going to fund a string of restaurant chains? Well, it's not like we don't like restaurants, and it's not like restaurants aren't good businesses, but the capital costs of a restaurant are super high, right? If you have 500 restaurants
Wow.
and you have to put money into each one. Now, there are venture firms that have backed restaurants.
Mon Pizza.
Trinity backed P.F. Chang's, which was a huge win for them. But that was a big risky bet where they were betting that they could fund the model and then get other companies to put capital into it later. So we look for big markets, but I think entrepreneurs sometimes have a blind spot for what big means. And I think we're looking for technology depth. You know, we're be able to answer this question. If someone tries to copy your idea, what will be hard about copying it? And if you tell us, well, we're going to build a brand, you know, I've spent so much money hiring branding for, I mean, brands matter, but for the first 5 years of your company's life, you just need a product that's better than everybody else's product, you know, period. And it doesn't, if it is, and it's a better service or it's a better product and you deliver it and you sell and market it well, that'll be sufficient. But telling me you'll protect it through your brand, what's that? You know, your brand is lots of people using that product and loving it and telling other people this is an awesome product. That's what your brand is. And so you can spend a lot of money building that, but you know, I think people don't always realize that you need something deep to protect the business, and that's hard to build.
Yeah, well, it is.
And it doesn't have to be tech, you know, like Facebook. Why was Facebook protectable? Well, because the network of people itself was the asset, and the more they kept sharing things with each other and adding more people and adding more photos and adding more stories and adding more users, before you knew it, that network effect became the asset.
Yeah.
It was really hard to copy.
Exactly. Yeah, I was talking to a couple founders of the day, and I was talking about financials. So I just want to hear from you. How much value do you put in the financials of a slide deck? I mean, a pitch deck to you. Like, do you look at that page?
We look at, it's a good question. I mean, most of the companies we fund aren't generating any revenue yet. So in fact, most companies we fund don't have a product finished when we fund them.
Yes.
Many of them have a product that's in development, and then they're working on that product, hoping to finish it and then sell it. So we do have some companies that we fund that are already generating revenue, but most of them aren't. So, and even if they do have revenue, it's probably really early days. So they probably don't have enough for us to put a lot of stock in it. What we are looking at is, does the model make sense logically?
Assumptions.
Yeah.
Assumptions.
For example, here's an example. I have a company called iSpot TV that I'm on the board of. We funded them, I think, 6 years ago. They have an analytics and software system that's disrupting the way you measure the efficacy of television advertising. And I could tell you a lot about the company. I'm a huge fan. But their business model roughly makes sense because a typical brand that they sell to, like T-Mobile, spends almost $900 million a year on advertising. And shockingly, a company like T-Mobile probably spends almost 2% of that $900 million with services like Nielsen to measure that advertising. And Nielsen's not going to go away anytime soon, but when Sean Muller, the iSpot CEO, came and talked to us about his business model, he was going to sell his product as a software service. He was going to sell it for far less than 2% of what the brands were spending on TV, and his product looked like it could do a much better job of helping advertisers spend money in the right places and get more ROI out of that spend. So his pricing model and what he was going to charge per brand, per customer, based on what they were in turn spending on advertising, like the numbers all made sense to us. We could ask ourselves, why would a customer spend that much? And then when he showed us how many customers there were of that profile, how much revenue on average he could sell to them, and then he modeled that into his P&L, and his costs of hiring sales and marketing people and building an R&D team. Like, the model made sense. It was just a model, but it made sense to us at a, it makes sense that
Macro level.
Yeah. Ed did the same thing with Wrench, as the CEO of Wrench. When Ed walked us through his model for what it would cost to acquire leads, get bids out to customers with cars, get a mechanic on-prem to service the car, pay for parts at a margin where the customer would feel good about what they spent on getting their car repaired, return a reasonable profit back to Wrench so that they could over time build a business that could be profitable. Like, the math all made sense and the detail was good, but it was all a big model. I
Yeah.
You know, so do we look at people's financials models? Yes, but we know they're gonna look like this, right? We know that it's gonna have this rosy picture downstream where it's a massive business, because
Sure.
people like me sit at things like this and tell you it needs to be, or we won't write you a check, and so they write that down, and we have a slide that looks like that. But we're interested in looking into the model to just say, hey, does that make sense to us in terms of what customers would pay for that? And then we'll also compare it to other businesses, like, okay, are there other companies that sell similar products and services, and what do their business models look like?
Yeah.
Other ones that have already succeeded and gone public or what have you, does this look similar enough to that, you know, the model makes sense?
Yeah, so it's more about just checking the assumptions, like checking the thought process.
What seems nuts sometimes is when someone shows us a curve that is so fast growth that it suspends belief, right? I mean, like we've been, you know, I know the most successful, most of us in venture are aware of the companies that in the history of business have grown from 0 to 100 million in 4 years. There are a few of them. Netscape did it, Amazon did it. You know, there are a few companies that were just, whatever, at the right place, right time, market was, but there aren't very many. So if you come and show us a model that looks too stratospheric too early, it just seems naive. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, we want to believe.
Yeah, exactly. You want to believe that's going to happen. Guys, feel free to start asking some questions. Just bring them up whenever you want. Jonathan, all the way back.
I had a question about founders. When you're referencing some of these companies, you're referencing like one person, right? And obviously maybe that's like where the relationship lies. So my question goes is, how important to you is founding team versus core, like, you know, stand-up founder, single founder?
Yeah, that's a great insight.
Repeat that. Let me repeat
Oh, yeah, you want to say it again?
Let me repeat it. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the question was, how much are we focused on one founder versus a team of founders? I will say, there's nothing more impressive than 2 or 3 or even 4 co-founders where all of them are super impressive. And so, I mean, I'll pick one example that immediately comes to mind. When I funded this company called MaxPoint, and I like the backstory, so I'm going to take 1 minute and explain the backstory. There's Joe and Kurt. Joe and Kurt were the nerdy punk rockers in Michigan that were buddies since they were 9 years old. And they'd always made a pact, like not some creepy blood pact, but they'd made a pact that someday they would start a company together. So they go through high school and college together, and Joe ends up going to Ford Motor Company and then Silicon Valley, works at 3Com and works at eBay. And so gets all this really good experience in the tech world. And Kurt goes to Texas and works at a bunch of networking companies. And then along the way, Joe met Gretchen at eBay, who had been at Tesla and I think Saturn. So she had yet a different set of experiences. But Joe and Gretchen really hit it off. She had super deep sales experience. Joe had kind of great finance and operations experience. And Kurt had great kind of technical chops and super deep engineering background. None of them had really been executives before, kind of per my earlier comment. But when they got that team together to start MaxPoint, first of all, I just thought they were all super smart and just impressive. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Like, you meet each one of them and think, wow, that's one of the smarter people I met this week.
Yeah.
And they all work for the same company. And then they were all different. Like, their skill sets were very different, and they all had completely different experiences. I mean, Kurt and Joe had this sort of blood pact to go do a company together, but I liked the fact that they'd actually gone out into the world and done these different things and then gotten together again, because I thought they probably trust each other, but they've seen different stuff. And so, yeah, it's a good insight. Like, I think when we meet, it also shows that the CEO is going to be able to share the stage with somebody else and attract awesome talent, right? And if all we need is the founder and then people that are, you know,
Mid-level.
that seem really subordinate to that person, doesn't matter what their title is or what their level is, but it's just more, does it feel like you've got a great collaboration happening with people that are going to challenge you? That's a great question.
Over the back.
Hi, my name is Preeti, and I'm a first-time founder of the company in the travel tech space. I have 2 questions which are kind of related. One is, does Madrona have a sweet spot when it comes to investing in terms of technology, say AI, ML, or business models in marketplaces? And the second question is, do the partners and managing directors at Madrona have certain
Yeah, so the question relates to what are our sweet spots for investing and what are the specialties, if any, for the managing directors, the investing partners. So I'll take them in that order. I'd say our spectrum ranges. So we have invested in everything from deep cloud, distributed computing, storage architecture, serverless computing, what I would call sort of next generation distributed computing architectures that are highly technical. That's a sweet spot for us in storage, in networking, in software-defined networks. We also, I'd say, have a sweet spot around analytics-driven computing using machine learning and AI. The first one and the second one, there are some companies that span both. So we have, I'd say, some deep technology investments there. We've done a lot in the IoT and sort of hardware space. But then we also have consumer-facing businesses where the asset is less about technology and more about business model disruption or consumer marketplace disruption. Redfin, which is a company people may have heard of, that went public in our portfolio that's disrupting the way people buy and sell houses. Rover, which is peer-to-peer dog sitting and walking, is less about technology and more about disrupting the way kennels work, because you can do away with kennels and have somebody else watch your dog or walk it. And then, Wrench, which I talked about, which I would describe as more of a business model and service disruption than is it a deep technology company, although there's a lot of software they've written there. In terms of the way partners work, because we're almost 90% focused on Seattle and Portland and Vancouver, but all Northwest, with a couple exceptions, we're a little more generalized than some venture firms. Some venture firms, perhaps in Silicon Valley, there are so many venture firms there that partners will be very maniacally focused on, maybe just consumer or just networking infrastructure. We're a little bit more, I don't want to use the word eclectic, but look at my portfolio. I've got a few companies that are consumer-facing marketplaces, HelloTech and Wrench. I have a few companies that are IoT-oriented infrastructure companies, Regato and M87, which was just acquired. And then I have a few marketing technology companies, iSpot, Visible, which was mentioned, which was acquired, Opal down in Portland, so Wicket Labs here in town. So we tend to have clusters, and what I always encourage founders to do is just go look at our web pages and look at our companies and see if what we've been up to looks like it's a good fit for what you're doing. And what I encourage, we're very careful not to fund companies that we feel like overlap or conflict with existing businesses. We just feel like, and even if they're close, I have this expression that when water starts at the top of a hill, even if it starts in two streams, it tends to end up in the same place when it gets to the bottom. So good ideas work that way sometimes. We try to be careful not to fund two companies that are close to each other, because the odds are over time they'll converge on the same types of products and customers, and that can create an awkwardness for us that we don't like, because we want to be fully committed to the companies that we've funded. So that was kind of a long answer to your question, but did that help?
Yes, absolutely, thank you. And Ed Peterson spoke highly of you.
Oh, who did?
Ed Peterson.
Oh, Ed Peterson. Well, Ed is well paid to say things like that. He's a good guy.
Yes, it is. Very good.
Hi, my name is Julie. I was hoping to get your take on kind of data ethics, and as you're advising startups and companies, especially in the emerging areas, when it comes to consumer data or enterprise data, what's kind of the guidelines that you have around how that data is treated, whether that data is sold, just kind of your take on the larger dialogue around data today.
Yeah, the questions around data ethics. I think it's a long conversation. What I think is unfortunate is a lot of people have had their data used for years without their knowledge, way before the internet happened. If you had any idea how much is known about your spending patterns by credit card companies and where that data is resold, if you wonder why you get direct mail pieces that look shockingly targeted, it's because your purchase history is being bought and sold and has been for decades. So I guess my first answer is, I think, and this is maybe a broader statement that has less to do with our companies, but if we're really going to get to the bottom of helping people better protect their data and their identity, we should not just start with what's going on the internet. There's a broader group of purveyors of that data. And is it anonymous? kind of. I mean, if I don't know who you are, but I sell your profile to somebody else because they want to send direct mail to someone that buys and sells or buys the goods and services that you purchase. I think that's okay if you agreed to do it and you knew you agreed to do it. And so I think that the common standard that I think I coach my companies on is, making sure consumers really are opting in and really do know they're opting in. Not, I mean, iSpot TV went through an episode of this where some of the ways they collect consumer data on people, on what television shows people watch or what commercials they may have seen, happened through a third-party relationship with a company called Vizio. Well, Vizio, in the early days, had a pretty quick screen that would flash on your TV when you first installed it that basically said, you're okay with people, understanding what TV shows you watch and what commercials you watch, right? And so if you blinked, you missed it, right? That's not opt-in, that's sort of opt-out. And so I just think that, but since that time, Vizio's, with some pressure from outside forces, has changed that model in a way that looks more like what you've seen happen in Europe with GDPR. But I think I'm okay with companies using data to do things that are better for targeting or better for getting the right messages. But I think consumers have to know it, and I think that's different than your data being sold. Because you don't know where it went after that. So it's a hot topic.
So my question would be, what are the other VC firms in Seattle area that's similar to Madrona that also invest into technology companies or technology-related companies? And for startups who are starting from Seattle, what journey would you suggest to take a path on? Should they go to Silicon Valley, go directly there, or what is your suggestion to a better way to do it?
What's Silicon Valley?
Exactly. So Len, is it okay that I say to go to Silicon Valley and skip Seattle?
No, look. Here's what I'd say. So there are great other firms in town. And venture's an interesting business because we're friends with and competitors of almost every venture firm. So if you name a venture firm in town, we've probably co-invested with every single one of them. Trilogy, Ignition, Mavron, Voyager, Pioneer Square Labs. I'm sure I'm missing some. And then there are firms that I think of as sort of more corporate venture firms, like Microsoft as an investing arm, the Vulcan Group. I'm going to miss some and feel bad, but yeah. So there are good firms in town, and we're happy to invest with them. I think, look, if we're doing our job at Madrona, and we're spending 90% of our time investing in Seattle-based companies, we should hear your story if it's a venture-backable, idea. And if we miss out on it because we're not smart enough to realize it's a great idea, shame on us. So we like to think that we'd love a chance to look at every idea if it feels like it's a venture-backable idea. But we also encourage people, and our pitch is that we're local, we're here, we can help you build your team, we can help you with your strategy, we can help you with space, we can do lots of different things. And that's our pitch, and we know some domains really well. We never, I also encourage entrepreneurs to go talk to other firms as well, go talk to firms in the Valley. There are great firms there. We've probably co-invested now with 60 different Silicon Valley firms who followed us. So this is an important, I think, distinction to describe. Most companies, by the time they get to the promised land, by the time they have the big outcome and an acquisition or go public, they probably raise 4 or 5 rounds. And so we've venture capital. So our goal is to lead really early and then invite more firms to keep investing along the way, such that you get a new firm each time you want a new firm to price that round, get a different person on the board that has different points of view, different ways to add value, and then so we play nice with all those folks. And I was joking. I know where Silicon Valley is, but you should talk to them too. But that's our pitch, and if we do a good job, then hopefully we'll get your attention. But that's up to us. And it's just as. But one last thing I'll just say is, it's just as much about you picking us as it is about us picking you. So you should do due diligence on us. You should talk to Ed Peterson and only Ed Peterson. Not me, no, I'm kidding. But you should talk to the CEOs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whatever partner you're talking to, you should talk to people and say, hey, what's that guy like to work with? Because I have strengths and weaknesses too. So do my partners. So you should go to school on us, and it should be a two-way conversation about you figuring out if we're the folks for you, just as much as it is, are we the right folks to
Yeah,
invest.
it's a huge two-way street. I mean, it is a marriage just like, I mean, it is so critical that you do the other side. And I've talked about this ad nauseum about that, but yeah, you have to interview. You have to interview Len. He's either a good fit for you or he is not. And he's like okay with that.
As nice as Silicon Valley is, I prefer Emerald Valley. So, what about when things go wrong? You invest in a company, everything looks great, all of a sudden something just doesn't happen the way it should, and the founder realizes this and goes, "Hi, we need to have a conversation. This isn't going to work, or I don't think it's going to work, or maybe it's a big pivot."
Yeah, so the question is, what about when things don't go well and you get the phone call from the entrepreneur? I mean, I've written a blog post, it was a long time ago on TechCrunch when my hair was a different color, and it was about 10 ways to manage your board. And I dye my hair gray now. One of the points I made in that post, and I can send it around if people thought it was helpful, is probably something you all know as managers and leaders of people. Bad news has to travel early. So the best CEOs I work with talk to me all the time. I have CEOs who want to grab coffee every other week. I have some CEOs where we just have a standing coffee every Wednesday at 8 o'clock. I have a couple CEOs that like that rhythm. I have some CEOs who just text me and call all the time. I have some CEOs who want to meet less frequently. Often those are the companies that are further along where frankly things are kind of figured out. There's still big challenges, but they're probably going to get escape velocity. But it's just like managing any other problem. If you're letting us know early on where you're starting to see weaknesses or challenges or problems, the odds that we can help you get through it are much greater, especially if we have time and capital and people that are still on board and behind the idea. Unfortunately, I think what is often true and so the best CEOs or founders work that way. They talk, and look, we've had some pretty colossal near-death experiences with almost every one of our big winners. I mean, Smartsheet, within a very short period of time of us investing in the company, basically rewrote the entire product. And that company went public last year. It was a big win for Madrona, great win for that team, great win for Seattle. But let me tell you, there was a point when they basically redid the whole product because it just wasn't very good. And I could explain. And so that wasn't a very fun conversation. It was a hard decision because we hadn't been investors for that long, but it was the right decision. It turned out well in the end, but we didn't fund the company thinking they were going to have to completely, essentially flush the product and start again. But that was the right call. We didn't give up. We funded the company. Are there situations where it's irrecoverable or unrecoverable? Yeah, I mean there have been situations for sure where we funded a company and after thinking about every different way to pivot or redo the product or go after a different market, we didn't get there. So that happens. But the odds that we can help figure it out are much greater, just as with any other situation. How upset are you when an employee on your team knows about something that's kind of a nagging problem and doesn't tell you until it's become a crisis, and now you would have liked to have helped them earlier. Usually it comes from good instincts, like people want to sort it out on their own. They don't want to bother you with it because they feel like, gosh, if I could figure this out, without Michael's help, he'd think I was a real superstar. Or maybe I won't even have to tell him about it because I'll figure it out and solve it before he even needs to know. Yeah. It's a good instinct on one hand, but it's probably not the right way to do things. And so your judgment about how to surface the right things. I also, and in that same blog post, write about, tell us if the plan's changing for little reasons or big reasons. Like, if you're totally wrong about a market or a customer segment and your product's wrong, that's a big deal, right? Like, that's not, gee, I wonder if I should mention this to Len. That's like a big deal. But maybe it's a more execution-oriented thing. Hey, we hired the wrong person in sales, or we've we're pricing it wrong. I mean, there are, I'd say, foundational things where if you have those wrong or you're worried about them, you should talk about those as fast as possible. There are things that are more execution oriented where you still should probably talk about them early, but there's probably more latitude to make adjustments. Does that help?
Yeah, it does, very good, thanks.
On a related note, you talked about when things are going wrong. When's the right time for you to invest? I mean, you've talked about a lot of expertise that you bring. Do you want to be really early? Do you want to be a little later? What benchmarks or hurdles do you want to see that a startup has achieved?
Are you saying what's the earliest one?
No, what's the optimal,
Okay.
right? And maybe earliest is related. I mean, you went through all the time
Yeah.
horizons.
Yeah, I'll let you in on a secret. So there's an expression in venture that drives me nuts, and it's when a venture capital firm says, well, we like your idea, you're just a little early for us. What the heck does that mean? Your website says you're an early stage investor. That guy in the blue coat sat at a meeting and told us that like we were early stage. Well, he said my idea was too early. What does the word early actually mean? Here's what I think venture firms actually mean when they say that. And this, I think sometimes we see an idea and we just believe it's going to work. We just believe that that pain point, that use case, that problem you're going after, you've explained it in a way where it makes sense to us. And if it's an enterprise idea, it would be helpful if we could go talk to prospects that you've talked to at least validate the concept. Yep, this pain point is a real pain point over here at company X, and we don't have any other products that are addressing it. We don't know if your company can build it, but if they could build it, we think they're onto something. Like that's a classic enterprise stage where the product's not done yet, it's conceptual. We like the idea, and we can validate it by talking to prospects. You don't have any customers yet because you don't have a product yet. Enterprises are easier because we can go talk to customers that you can go brief on the idea. The ones that are tricky are consumer ideas. I have one the other day, and this one was slightly awkward because it was someone that I'd worked with for a long time ago who will go nameless. And this person had a consumer idea where honestly there was just no way to know if this consumer idea was going to work or not. You could go do focus groups, I suppose, or go ask a bunch of people in this room, what do you think of this idea? But I basically just don't think the idea is going to work. I just don't think people are going to engage in this consumer behavior. And so I said, I can make up a story about you're too early. I just said, basically, the truth is I could be wrong, but I don't think it's going to work because I don't think people really like that. So we're going to need to see more traction. And I tried to lay it out. Hey, I think when you've got your first 500 users and you could show us that they're repeat using this service enough, then I think we'd jump in, especially if we were seeing really great repeat usage and number of hours a day or whatever the metrics were. But
Show me I'm wrong.
yeah, I think I'm answering your question in kind of an ambiguous way, but I'm trying to be clear that in business or enterprise where we can talk to prospects and vet the pain point and competition, it's a lot easier than consumer where honestly, I think some firms just see a consumer idea and they just think, that's a good idea, that's gonna work. But like, how many people here would have funded Instagram? I say Instagram now and you all are like, well, yeah, it's like, who wouldn't have funded that?
Twitter.
It wasn't as obvious to fund Instagram. If you'd said that a massive consumer behavior will be people taking pictures with phones and sharing them voraciously all day, every day. It's easy to look at that now and say, well, that's so obvious, everybody was going to do that. I remember, sorry, I'm going to rattle on this one for 2 more minutes. People in Japan were taking photos with primitive feature phones a lot earlier than people were in the US, and they were sharing photos. And I remember so many people saying, that is a really unusual behavior. What's different about what the culture in Japan that has them doing that? We were just behind in the US. And they use a lot of rapid transit. People are on trains all the time. They have more capable phones with better wireless networks. But I remember people saying, it's a really unusual niche behavior that's special to their culture. Really? No, they were just early. They were 30 years early to that idea, 25.
Yeah, so we just more
I just
confident.
missed it.
Yeah.
So if you guys are investing in companies that are pre-revenue, how are you different from angels? Like how should we think about approaching angels versus approaching VC companies like yours?
That's a great question.
We basically do both. I mean, the word, it would probably surprise people here how many angel rounds we invest in. So I think sometimes people think it's serial, like, well, I raise an angel round and then I raise a seed venture firm round. When Madrona, I funded Ed Peterson's round at Wrench in the angel round actually. So and we didn't lead it. So I knew Ed because our kids were playing soccer on the field one day, and I said, "What are you doing, Ed?" And he said, "Well, I just got back from the car dealership, and I have this idea because I'm really mad about the way my car got serviced, and I think I'm going to launch a company around, fixing cars." And I was like, "That's the dumbest idea I've ever heard of." And now we're the biggest investor now. He then, he kept telling me about the idea, but he actually organized the seed round with a different lead investor. And then, but I stayed close to him and said, "Hey, if there's room, we'd love to jump in and co-invest in that seed round with the other angels because we'd be happy to do that." And then I also made it clear, hey, if the company does well and hits its milestones, we'd probably be in a better position to lead the next round, which we ended up doing. And then we helped bring in another investor for the round after that. So we do a lot of seed investing. I think people should feel like we're totally open to looking at seed deals. And if we tell you it's too early, you should say, "Hey, but Len said it's never too early." And ask us what we mean by that. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't mean we'll fund every angel and seed round we see. There are times when the truth is exactly what I just said. We see a seed round or an angel round get funded and we go, "You know what? We're not quite there yet at Madrona, but we still like having met you," because we carefully track all those companies. And if we do a good job, we stay back out in front of those entrepreneurs. We have a list of companies that we passed on where we didn't quite get there on the angel or seed round, and we review it, frequently to make sure we're trying to do a good job of staying back out in touch in front of those entrepreneurs. We don't do as good a job as we could, and I'm sure we missed some where we could do better, but we want to stay in touch with those people. So I don't think it's time wasted.
Last question.
So I was just curious, where do you think the trend for CPG startups are headed, and do you feel like your company would invest in CPG startups, or are there other VCs in the Seattle area that would be interested in this space? And more specifically, I'm curious about the healthy food startup industry, which I think is booming, and there's a lot of demand in that, and it's projected to have a very high growth over the next few years. So where do you see opportunity for that, or potential for that?
Yeah, the question is around what would our enthusiasm be for investing in a CPG, a consumer packaged goods oriented, a consumer product company.
And specifically in the healthy food area, which would fall under the CPG space as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think our big questions would be, how do you protect it? And I didn't mean to be so negative about brands. I think brands are powerful. I just think that you can't lean on it. I think you need some level of differentiation in the early days. And that could be that your product just, is better on some level, tastes better, works better, is less expensive, something that's sustainable, that's drawn from something protectable. So that'd probably be one of our top questions. I'll bring up one quick example. This isn't CPG, but if you've heard of a company called Indochino, that's a company that we invested in very early on. Indochino basically makes bespoke suits and shirts. So, and their innovation was really more about business model and distribution and manufacturing. So their premise was, if you're a young man and you have to buy a suit for work, you could spend $1,000 on a really expensive suit, but you could instead spend half to a third that. Have someone measure you, get to look at fabric swatches, order the suit, and then have it made overseas and shipped custom made for you at about a third to half the price. And you could order it on the internet. Now they also have stores. There's a store here that people have probably seen on, I think, 4th or 5th.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's like now they have 40 of those stores. So, was that a tech company? Not really. It's a consumer product. It's a relatively expensive consumer product, but what they were disrupting is the supply chain, the distribution model, the inventory model. They don't have to carry a bunch of inventory, which in retail apparel is a killer, right? So if they can just have enough inventory and enough samples that you could go get a sense for the product, order it, have it custom made for you, like that was the innovation that we were betting on. So I think we'd be very open-minded about that kind of a product. We kind of want to ask, what's special that will let you protect it in terms of the way you build it? And the healthy foods market, I mean, you're right, that's a big, interesting trend.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
Let's give Lynn a big round of applause for being here.